Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take the sources, really dig into them, and pull out the key insights. It's basically a shortcut to getting informed without, drowning in information.
Exactly. We get you the core stuff fast.
And today, we're tackling a big one. Critical thinking. It's, fundamental.
Absolutely. It crops up everywhere, life, work, just making sense of the world.
And you, our listener, sent over a great mix of materials. We've got the Stanford Encyclopedia Philosophy entry, very detailed.
The SCP entry is sort of our anchor here.
Right, but also articles looking at why it matters, personal development links, even how it connects to things like, AI.
So let's start with the SCP definition, kind of the baseline. They frame critical thinking as essentially careful thinking directed toward a goal.
Careful thinking, goal-directed, so it's intentional.
Precisely. Not just random thoughts floating around. Now, what careful means exactly, or what those goals are, that's where different viewpoints come in, and the sources explore that.
Okay, makes sense. But let's pause there. Why should you, listening now, care about this deep dive? I mean, thinking with intention sounds a bit abstract, maybe.
Well, think about it. Are you prepping for a big meeting? Trying to get up to speed on a new field? Or maybe you're just, curious.
Right. Understanding critical thinking isn't just academic. It has, real practical value.
That's our mission today, to unpack what critical thinking is, based on these sources, why it's so crucial, and importantly, what it actually looks like in action, using the examples and ideas right from the materials provided.
Okay, let's jump in then. Why does critical thinking matter so much? What are the sources telling us?
Well, the Stanford Encyclopedia hits on two big things right away: autonomy and democratic citizenship.
Autonomy, so thinking for yourself, making your own choices.
Exactly. And for democracy, well, you need citizens who can actually evaluate information, weigh arguments, and participate meaningfully, not just be swayed by, the loudest voice.
That makes a lot of sense. A society that can't think critically is, vulnerable.
Definitely. And it's not just societal. The sources really stress the personal impact, too.
Yeah. How so?
The Stanford entry links it broadly to success in life. Okay, that's pretty general.
Bit vague, maybe.
A little. But then another piece, why is philosophy important?
Yeah.
It's more specific. It argues philosophy and critical thinking is core to philosophy, helps guide our ethical decision-making.
Ah, okay. Ethics. That's concrete.
And it gets even more practical. That same article makes a strong case for philosophy, and thus critical thinking, being vital for good management.
Management. How does that work?
It talks about needing to analyze situations objectively, predict potential problems before they blow up, navigate those tricky ethical gray areas.
Things managers face all the time.
Right. And also questioning the status quo. Not just accepting this is how we've always done it. That's where innovation comes from.
So it's about analysis, foresight, ethics, and innovation. That's a powerful skill set for anyone in a leadership role.
Absolutely. And the article points out this kind of thinking is becoming even more relevant now with things like AI ethics and complex copyright issues in the digital age. Philosophy isn't just ancient history, it's tackling today's problems.
And there's a deep personal layer, too, isn't there? The philosophy and personal development source brought up Socrates.
Ah, yes. An unexamined life is not worth living. That classic line.
It suggests critical thinking isn't just outward-facing, solving external problems, but also inward-facing, examining our own beliefs, our assumptions.
Exactly. Self-awareness. It's about understanding why we think what we think, questioning those foundations. It's not just a detached analytical skill. It's tied to how we understand ourselves.
Okay, so it's important for personal growth, for professional success, for ethical choices, and even for a healthy society. That's quite a list.
It really is. The sources build a strong case for its significance.
So if it's that important, what does it actually look like? Can we get some examples? The Stanford piece had some good ones, right?
Yes. They're really helpful for making it concrete.
Right.
Let's take the transit example. Someone needs to get uptown, right?
Okay. Simple scenario.
They don't just jump on the first bus they see. They think, okay, I could take the surface car, but it might be slow. The subway express is faster, but maybe the station is further away, or the elevated train. They're weighing time, potential obstacles, convenience.
It's like a mini optimization problem in their head, assessing options against criteria.
Precisely. Then there's the ferry boat example.
Yeah.
Someone sees this long white pole on the boat.
Yeah.
Their first thought might be, oh, it's a flagpole. But then they look carefully. It's horizontal, there's no rope, no pulley, and hey, there are other actual flagpoles over there.
So the initial hypothesis doesn't fit the evidence.
Right, so they have to rethink, maybe it's just decoration.
Yeah.
or part of some wireless system,
Yeah.
or indicates direction. They generate alternatives and evaluate them against what they're actually seeing.
That's a great illustration of observation, hypothesis, testing, like a little scientific method moment.
It is. And the bubbles example is similar. Someone notices bubbles on a glass, first outside, then inside. Why?
Yeah, why would that happen?
They get curious. They start thinking about air, temperature changes. Maybe the air inside contracted when it cooled, then expanded. They might even, try shaking the glass or turning it differently to see what happens, testing their ideas.
Observation, curiosity, forming explanations, simple experiments. It makes critical thinking feel very grounded, not just some lofty ideal.
Exactly. These everyday examples show it's a practical process. Then the suction pump example shifts to a more formal scientific setting.
Okay, how's that different?
Here you see a scientist noticing a pump has limits, focusing specifically on atmospheric pressure as the likely factor, designing controlled experiments, comparing the results carefully, and then connecting it all to related ideas, like siphons or balloons.
So it's more systematic, more rigorous maybe, connecting concepts across different areas?
Yes, it shows that methodical approach often needed in science. And the last one, the rash example.
Oh yeah, I think many of us have been there.
Right, you get a rash. What caused it? Was it that new soap? The medication I started? Something I ate, like those probiotics? Maybe just heat rash?
You run through the possibilities.
Exactly. You consider the timing. When did it start relative to trying something new? Where is the rash? You weigh the evidence, however limited, and then decide, okay, I should probably stop using that new cream first and see what happens.
It's diagnostic reasoning, basically. Making the best judgment you can with incomplete information, dealing with uncertainty.
That's a key part of it. So these examples paint a picture of the process.
They really do. So if that's the process, are there some core features or characteristics that define critical thinking? What do the sources say?
Balin and colleagues, mentioned in the Sapient Tree, highlight three things. First, it's purposeful. You're trying to achieve something, decide what to believe, or figure out what to do.
Got it. It has a goal.
Second, you're trying to meet certain standards. Standards of adequacy, accuracy, relevance, whatever fits the task. You're not just thinking randomly, you're trying to think well.
Okay. Purposeful and aiming for quality.
And third, it actually needs to meet those standards to some reasonable degree. It's not just about trying, it's about achieving a certain threshold of quality in your thinking.
Purpose, standards, threshold. That's a neat summary. What about the specific skills involved? The SEP article listed quite a few.
Yeah, it's a comprehensive list. It starts right at the beginning, observing things around you, feeling that sense of puzzlement or curiosity when something doesn't quite add up.
That's weird moment.
Exactly. And then formulating actual questions, wondering why something is the way it is.
So curiosity sparks the questions.
Right. Then you move into imagining possible answers, possible solutions, and inferring, figuring out the implications, drawing conclusions from evidence.
Okay, imagining and inferring.
Using your existing knowledge is crucial, of course. You don't think in a vacuum. And sometimes, like in the bubbles example, experimenting, designing, and running tests, even simple ones.
And finding information. That must be huge now.
Absolutely critical today. Consulting sources, finding information. And this is key, evaluating that information. Is it credible, biased, relevant?
That skill alone feels like a full-time job sometimes.
Tell me about it. Then there's identifying and analyzing arguments, breaking them down, seeing how they're constructed, spotting assumptions.
Understanding how someone is trying to persuade you.
Exactly. And finally, making judgments based on the evidence and reasoning you've gathered, and choosing a course of action or adopting a belief based on those judgments.
It's quite a toolkit of mental abilities.
It really is. But the SIP entry makes a crucial point. Just having the skills isn't enough. You also need the right dispositions.
Dispositions, you mean like your attitude towards thinking?
Sort of, yeah. Your general tendencies or inclinations. Are you motivated to use these skills? Do you actually value thinking carefully? It takes motivation to start and habit to sustain it.
So it's not just ability, it's also willingness.
Right. Critical thinkers, the entry says, tend to enjoy using their abilities. They're committed to inquiry, to finding things out.
What kind of specific dispositions are we talking about?
Things like being open-minded, willing to actually consider different viewpoints, even ones you disagree with.
That can be tough.
It can. Also, willingness to suspend judgment, not jumping to conclusions too quickly, seeking clarity, trying to state questions and issues precisely, maintaining focus. being persistent when things get difficult.
Not giving up easily when a problem is complex.
Exactly. And very importantly, being willing to self-correct, recognizing you might be wrong, and being open to revising your views based on new evidence or better reasoning.
That humility seems key, the ability to say, oops, maybe I didn't have that right.
Absolutely. And underlying all these skills and dispositions is an understanding of certain fundamental concepts.
Concepts? Like what?
Well, basic distinctions, like
Yeah.
knowing the difference between an observation, the light is red, and an inference, therefore I must stop.
Okay, what you see versus what you conclude from it.
Right. Understanding ambiguity and vagueness in language, how words can have multiple meanings or lack precision. Knowing the difference between conclusive inference, like in logic or math deduction, versus defeasible inference, where conclusions are probable but not certain induction, which is most of everyday reasoning.
Deduction versus induction. Okay.
Understanding necessary versus sufficient conditions. For example, oxygen is necessary for fire, but it's not sufficient on its own. You also need fuel and heat.
Got it. Important distinctions for clear thinking.
Very. And when evaluating evidence, understanding terms like hypothesis, null hypothesis, assumption, prediction, knowing the difference between statistical significance is a result unlikely due to chance, and practical importance, does the result actually matter in the real world?
Yeah, those two get mixed up all the time.
They do. Also, being able to distinguish different kinds of studies, a proper experiment, versus just observing correlations, randomized controlled trials versus, say, looking back at past data, knowing the strengths and weaknesses of each.
Understanding how the evidence was generated.
Exactly. And finally, the basic building blocks of arguments: premise, assumption, conclusion, counter-consideration. Being able to identify these helps you analyze reasoning effectively.
Wow. Okay, so it's skills, dispositions, and understanding these underlying concepts. It's a pretty comprehensive picture.
It is. But it's not always easy to put into practice consistently. The sources mention some challenges.
Like what?
Well, that Stanford entry points out something interesting. Sometimes people learn critical thinking skills in one context, say in a specific university class, but then struggle to apply them elsewhere in their lives.
Oh, yeah. They gave an example, didn't they?
They did. Students in a women's studies class might become very skilled at critically analyzing, say, gender stereotypes in fairy tales. But then they might not apply that same critical lens to unexamined assumptions in their own personal relationships. The skills don't automatically transfer.
Huh. That's a fascinating point. It takes conscious effort to apply these tools broadly.
It seems so, which perhaps links to the idea of practical philosophy mentioned on Wikipedia. It's about taking philosophical tools, including critical thinking, and applying them to real-world issues, not just keeping them theoretical.
Making philosophy useful, essentially.
Right. And we see efforts to cultivate these skills early on. That systematic review on philosophy for children, P4C.
Right, P4C. What did that find?
It found strong evidence that P4C programs really do help develop higher-order thinking, reasoning, critical thinking, creative thinking too. And importantly, it wasn't just about the exercises. It was also about creating a safe, supportive classroom environment where kids felt comfortable questioning and discussing ideas. A culture of thinking.
So starting young seems beneficial, and the review itself was rigorous.
Yeah, they followed standard scientific review methods, PRISMA guidelines, thematic analysis to synthesize the research findings.
Okay. Now, one of the other sources tackled a huge topic: the meaning of life. How does that connect, if at all, to critical thinking? They seem quite different.
They are distinct topics, for sure. The Internet Encyclopedia Philosophy entry explores various philosophical takes on meaning, purpose, significance.
Big questions.
Huge. But critical thinking is the tool you might use to examine those different perspectives. You can analyze the arguments for or against certain views on meaning, check their assumptions, evaluate their coherence. So while critical thinking doesn't give you the meaning of life, it helps you think more clearly about the question and the different proposed answers.
It helps you navigate those complex ideas. Makes sense.
And finally, let's quickly touch on AI ethics. That came up in a couple of places.
Yeah, the Why Philosophy Matters piece and the Seth entry on AI ethics.
Right. This is a prime example of where critical thinking is desperately needed today. We're building these incredibly powerful AI systems.
And they raise all sorts of ethical questions: bias, accountability, impact on jobs, even consciousness.
Exactly. We need to critically evaluate the claims made about AI, scrutinize the algorithms for fairness, think through the societal consequences. The idea of algorithmic accountability reporting is mentioned that requires deep critical assessment. It's not just a technical challenge, It's deeply philosophical and ethical.
It really feels that the more complex our world gets with more information and more powerful technology.
The more essential critical thinking becomes just to navigate it all responsibly.
Okay, so let's try to pull this all together. As we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways?
Well, I think it's clear critical thinking isn't just one single thing. It's multifaceted. It involves specific skills, observing, questioning, analyzing, judging,
Right, the toolkit.
but also those crucial dispositions being open-minded, curious, persistent, willing to self-correct. The mindset, if you like.
The mindset, yeah. And underpinned by understanding key concepts about logic, evidence, and argument.
Exactly. And it's definitely not just for philosophers or academics. The sources make it clear it's a vital tool for, well, everyone, for making better decisions in your personal life, for succeeding professionally, for being an engaged citizen.
So for you listening, hopefully this exploration, drawing on all those different sources, has given you a richer, more practical understanding of critical thinking, something you can actually use.
And maybe a point for reflection. Thinking about everything we've discussed, the skills, the examples, those dispositions, is there one specific aspect of your own thinking process that you might want to examine a bit more critically going forward?
Or perhaps think about a challenge you're facing right now. How could applying some of these principles, questioning assumptions, evaluating evidence, considering alternatives, help you approach it differently?
Just something to mull over. There's always more to explore in the sources themselves, of course.
Absolutely. We encourage you to do that. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
We'll catch you on the next one.